Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Class 1A podcast for the deep dive into Season 6, Episode 17. As always, I am your host, Andrew Nimsgren, and alongside me I have James Graham to deal with what is really the true Hellish Todoroki family episode. The titling and all of it makes sense because that was last week's episode when really this was literally 20 minutes the Todoroki's talking. So I remember liking the title. I forget what it was off the top of my head now, but to no surprise, we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about the Todorokis today. James, how are you feeling about this? I mean, this feels like the biggest keeping up the Todorokis we've had to date. Did it live up to the ongoing series we have here?
Yeah, I think it actually, I think throughout most of the series, we've seen like sprinklings of like why this family is pretty dysfunctional and fucked up. And this is just like, okay, this is really what happened. Like, the doors off the attic, and you're like, okay, well, this is where all the deep dark secrets start coming out, and how they deal with it as a family unit is pretty interesting. So I'm pretty excited to talk about it.
Yeah, and I'm not really going to do a full recap. Obviously, pretty much the entire episode is one, just the family talking about how the kids were raised, the origins of Toya, and what actually happened to them in the fire accident. And then we got a little brief recap on how the world is, but that's pretty much what last week's episode was anyways. Yeah. And then we got a little bit of sprinklings of the questions of what is all for one for all, which we'll talk about a little bit here as well. But obviously, James, let's just kind of walk through almost step by step the best we can of everything that happened here. And with the Todorokis. And the first thing I want to say here is Endeavor is not a great person. We have said that multiple times here too. But everything he did wasn't necessarily wrong. Some of it just had the worst execution I've ever seen to date. Like, of anything ever done. Like, the idea of protecting Toya or like keeping Todoroki away, like, we'll talk about it. But keeping Toya away from Todoroki, as horrible as that is, was a smart move. Toya would have killed him.
I was gonna say, like, we want to say like keeping Toya away from Shoto because it is the entire Todoroki family, so we should differentiate like which member we're talking about. But yeah, obviously, clearly, Toya was having a rough time. He was having a bad go. He inherited a lot of his father's drive and obsession with surpassing All Might. So, and that started to manifest into, oh shit, this new kid that is born into my family is exactly what my dad wanted. I'm not what he wanted. And that just starts this vicious cycle. And then you have Endeavor trying to deal with, okay, well, now I have the perfect kid. Oh crap, my kid wants to kill one of the other kids. It's like, and yeah, it's definitely like for somebody who is clearly not a good communicator and not a kind. I wouldn't say Endeavor's not. He's not capable of being kind, but he's not like that is not his default setting by any stretch. Yeah. Especially in his youth, which this is a lot of this is kind of focused around.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely Toya's breaking point. But even kind of going back is like, I found it very interesting. One, we learned a little bit about quirk testing here too, is that they were able to tell that his inheritance for fire was stronger and that he was more like resistant to ice without him even being there. So I'm guessing just by blood work, you're able to know everything about quirks, which one, I find that really interesting and cool. I actually don't remember reading the manga much. I didn't remember that Toya had much of a resistance to ice. I just remember that his firepower is stronger, and then what we got to later on this episode is that his firepower is tied actually to his emotions. Like, that was the only parts I remember about Dabi's kind of kit. I don't actually remember the resistance to ice, which does set up an interesting thing we talk about of Todoroki, who is aka better in his eyes than him because he has that ice power. I found that really kind of interesting there as well. So a lot of really cool things with the quirk testing, and it's cool to learn actually what Dabi's capable of because we didn't 100% understand until today.
Yeah, it was something that like I think there's a ton like on how Dabi's flames worked and how his quirk like was different from his dad's was like a huge thing that the community kind of speculated until basically up until this episode. Like I know, especially when Dabi was introduced and like going way back, like everybody was like, oh my god, like how is he related to Endeavor and stuff like that, and trying to differentiate between the blue flames and the red and stuff like that. So I think it is really nice to have all this background info on the inner workings of Dobby and why he is the way he is, how his quirk reacts the way he is, and yeah, why he has this inherent advantage against Shoto, because his fire is more powerful than his, and his like the ice is not nearly as effective against somebody who uses fire, which is it's really this kind of cool parallel that they use with him. So it's, and then yeah, then then you just throw in probably one of the worst teachers in the world, and yeah, it's, I guess that's how you get a
Well, the
super
thing
villain.
is like Endeavor, we never even saw really Endeavor teaching him. Like I think that was the thing too. So yes, he's a shitty teacher, but at this point, I think that was kind of the big issue, is that he just didn't know how to deal with it. And again, kind of going back to that, like not knowing how to tell your kid that, yeah, you can't really probably live up to your dream. Like I don't know how any parent could possibly do that, especially in this world where kind of being a hero is so much more realistic. But it's just, yeah, there's just so many things we don't know about quirks, because we kind of saw that, like, oh no, like you can kind of train your resistances. Like if I remember during the forest training arc, didn't Todoroki kind of like do flames while like in an ice bath to kind of help like with his body regulation? Like there's no way to kind of help with his resistance to fire, or building up a tolerance or something. Like I don't know, it just feels weird that everywhere else we've seen like, oh no, like you can just kind of build up and get stronger with your quirk, but we couldn't here.
The big separation between Dobby and anybody else who's using really any like quirk training and stuff like that is that it seemed that inherently his quirk was almost rejecting him to begin with. Not maybe not rejecting him, but his body wasn't equipped to handle how powerful his flames were. And I think that's why you see his inability to be able to train it, right? He was constantly being burned, and maybe it could have something to do with his body being more resistant to ice too. Maybe it was because would that mean it runs naturally hotter? So like we don't get into the specifics on why that is. Like all we are told is that he's more resistant to ice, and that's really about it. So you can kind of start to theorize that, oh, if he runs at like a higher core temperature, then yeah, if he's cranking that up already, how hot are those flames? Obviously hot enough to beat Endeavor and Shoto in the same
Well, hot
at the
enough
same
to turn
time.
blue. Like I forget what
Hot
it
enough
is,
to
but
turn
like
blue,
the
exactly,
percentage
right?
to turn blue versus red, it's a pretty big difference. Like flames have to be fucking hot to be blue.
And that's just it, right? So like I mean, yeah, how much can his body withstand to that point? Obviously, as he started to crank it up more and more and more, he was just getting more and more badly burnt. And obviously we see end result Dobby now, where those flames are just so powerful that they basically have just like charred skin on him. So I just think this was like a baseline thing of like like maybe in some timeline Toya gets to the point where he can refine this quirk that he's not burning himself, or maybe he wears something that cools him off or something like that, or helps him cope with how hot these flames get. But I think just because everything, like every other external factor factoring into this, really made Toya's situation that much more tragic, So
Yeah.
he was so hell bent on becoming what his father wanted that he just completely damaged himself doing it.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of that. And I want to talk one more thing about Toya, but I also want to talk about Ray here in a second too, because obviously the other person that pretty much went through as much emotional turmoil as well. Maybe not as much physical, but definitely as much emotional. But with Toya, the one thing that didn't get answered in this episode, how did he survive? Like we just did not get that answer at all here. Like it looked like he was burned alive. Did he just kind of limp away? He had to like, did All For One find him? Like, I guess we don't really know exactly what happened. I don't know if that gets answered here, but like, we obviously we just talked about how his body is now resistant to flames, and we just saw him sitting in flames in a forest fire that engulfed miles. It looked like from the distance. So how the hell did he survive? Is the one thing I want to kind of know. Maybe they just don't explain that and say All For One got there, but that just didn't click with me.
So at this point in the series, like we've had one like basically entirely simulated death. So at this point, the question for me is not like, oh, I wonder how that happened. It's like, okay, it definitely happened. Like he survived it, obviously, and they're going to be able to explain it. It's just how do they go about it, right?
Yeah.
So I guess
Didn't they like find his jawbone or something? Didn't Endeavor like find his jawbone like earlier on,
yeah,
like when we first learned about Toya?
yeah. So the first time where I think it was in Dobby's dance or maybe leading up to it. Yeah, they're like that is like a part of the shrine is basically like the remnants that they do find of him, which I think even Dobby confirms in the episode as well that he removed part of his jaw or something like that, or he
Yeah,
burned
he
himself
probably
that
did burn
bad.
off.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I think that was covered. So yeah, it's the how will be interesting, but I don't think it's going to be like super shocking, just because at this point, well, I mean, Best Genius was literally like confirmed KIA by Hawks, and then that went and flipped totally 180. So,
Yeah.
um, I do kind of want to just quickly discuss kind of this psychology behind, or maybe I don't want to call it the psychology, but like how that family dynamic ironed into what it became, sort of thing, like between all these external factors of Endeavor having too much pressure on Toya initially, thinking, oh, okay, like this, like he will be the prodigal son, like his firepower will surpass All Might, sort of thing. Um, and then putting all of that into Toya to think, okay, I can be that, I can do that, and causing him to like wanting to push harder and harder and harder. And then Shoto comes along, and Shoto is like he's straight up half and half, right? And on top of that, you have like we're gonna get into with like Ray and everything like that, her trying to do her best in this role, and then oh god, there's just so many. The whole issue of Dobby is so like there's so many layers to it that it like I do think it's like one of those like deep dive episodes that we do at some point, really dissecting this entire family dynamic, because we've gotten what, like 6 episodes at this point covering this family.
Something like
Like,
that.
yeah, exactly. It's crazy. So, I think it is really hard to like boil down their entire family into one episode, like one like individual episode that's doing like a recap sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a big piece of the kind of missing puzzle here was really Ray's part in it. And that's why I
Hmm.
enjoyed a lot of it, because that was a piece that we didn't know. We kind of seen how him and the siblings interact. They've always been good. We obviously know how the Endeavor relationship is, but we never really knew what. We knew from it early on that Ray snapped and threw boiling hot water at Shoto because of him seeing Endeavor in Shoto, which was really the only thing we ever got. But this one kind of opened up a little bit more, where we started kind of seeing one of the natural breaking point, but how she saw the same eyes in Toya, how she saw the same eyes in Endeavor. I didn't quite get the same eyes from when Shoto was looking at that. Obviously, she was already past the breaking point. I mean, I guess maybe they have different eye colors too, which is another thing that I kind of saw pointed out there. So like, I could definitely see the correlation between Toya's eyes and Endeavor's eyes. I think those are very clear. They did a great job of jumping back and forth with that. But I didn't see that same in Shoto, but I think that just might have been a breaking point for her.
Yeah, so I think the big thing with that is, yeah, the damage is already done, but because Shoto is half Endeavor, like where I think Natsu and I can't remember her name.
I couldn't either. That's
Uh,
why I didn't say the names.
yeah. The sister. Yeah, she's the only sister in the family. So yeah, the sister. They like most of their traits are inherited from Ray, and Shoto's really the next one down the lineage after Toya that has like so many contributing factors from Endeavor. So I
Yeah. And I
think
guess he did have like the red hair peeking around the corner.
he
And
had the
stuff
red
too,
hair.
like,
Oh, and that's just it, right? So you have all of these, like you have this trauma after trauma of basically both your husband and your child who have heavily inherited those quirks, and then you have Shoto, who, yes, is probably nothing like his dad at that point, but he also has the same kind of appearance, and like, yeah, because I think anybody with primarily Ray's quirks, their eyes are grayish, like the iris is actually like gray or almost black, but any with Endeavors is blue. So I think, yeah, because I think both Toya and Shoto have their like Shoto's fire eye is blue.
Mm.
So I think that's where you start seeing that association, and then Ray's already super fucked up at that point. So yeah, there's our hot water situation.
I mean, I think I'd break too after how deep Toya went after her. Like,
Well,
fuck, that
yeah,
was a brutal interaction there.
yeah,
And just another thing too is like they didn't show it much there, but Toya just had extreme hate for his sister and his mom too, calling all women in the family useless too, which felt like a jump that I don't know where that came from because we never really saw that interaction there too. But I think that definitely kind of played into that interaction there. But another thing I didn't remember reading, but it kind of stood out to me in a show of like I didn't know he hated his sister as well.
yeah, and like, and it's weird because like Natsu's just exempt from everything. Maybe
Yeah,
it's because
don't
Natsu's the
give one.
oldest, and like there is that just that inherent respect for the eldest sibling sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know what the deal is there because I could see him maybe taking some of his like it really felt like Toya was everything that was bad in Endeavor. Like
Yeah,
he inherited all of that, right? So any resentment that Endeavor had for Ray basically not being able to do like give a child that is the perfect half and half. Endeavor starts having some degree of resentment, maybe doesn't hold it in the best, and then Toya picks up any inkling of that and like turns it up to 11, right? So and I think on top of it too, it was the fact that Ray was defending Shoto as well, who is obviously a massive threat to basically Toya's potential. I guess in his eyes, his potential like acknowledgement from his father, right? So
yep,
it's just yeah. This episode really drives home that how dog shit the Todoroki family is at communicating and not only that, but like establishing like what is right to really pass on to your kids and like because so much of the Todoroki family inherited Endeavor's goals, whether they liked it or not. They they,
yeah,
they were just there.
I agree. But we do kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously,
Yeah.
this whole episode was because they're trying to come back together. Seeing what that actually looks at, like it really just ended with Shoto saying, "Okay, let's do this. Gotta put a hand out," and then obviously Hawks and Best Genius kind of came and interrupted. So I don't know if I really don't think we're going to see the rest of them again. I still think this is going to go back to the Shoto and Endeavor show. But I think it was kind of a good moment to seeing that his whole family was kind of back behind him again for the first time, even if he doesn't really deserve it. But I do think we're coming towards the end of the Keeping Up the Todorokis. Probably after the big final battle will be the last time. I think we see a lot of these guys again.
Yeah, I think we get one big showdown with like Dobby, and that'll
Yeah, and then
probably be
maybe the
like
family reacting to it all afterwards.
yeah, exactly. But I do think it is kind of crazy that how how the family dynamic deals with this is like, and I kind of
They
like
all
it
took
because
personal blame, which
well they did and they didn't they did acknowledge that Endeavor was the biggest culprit, like
yeah,
Endeavor fucked up the most, but they were like, okay, you definitely screwed up, but we were also like there was things we could have done too. So it was basically like yes, he was like it was a bunch of little contributing factors from the rest of the family, but it's nice that they're not letting him off the hook either, right? They
yeah.
fully acknowledge that he's the problem.
But anything else with the Todorokis? I agree. I think this just needs to be a 40-minute deep dive on the side as well. But anything else in this episode? I think
It
we
really
try to hit
does.
on a lot of the big things. So obviously the one last thing I just want to touch on very briefly because I think it'll be a big point in next episode. So I don't think we need to talk about it too much. But
Yeah.
obviously the question is starting to float around of what is one for all. Obviously reporters were kind of asked about outside. I think people were already smart enough to put together all for one and one for all. I'm kind of seeing what that is, and I think Hawks is already kind of figuring it out. It looks like towards the end of this episode. Next week obviously is going to be more of a inside Deku's head, the vestige state only, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of a conversation outside as well between Hawks and All Might. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious to see where it goes. I don't think it's going to be super public, like I think I've talked about in the last couple episodes, but it definitely starting to feel like it's going to come out soon. Who
Mm.
knows exactly when, but now the media's kind of onto it, I don't feel like that's something that's just going to get dropped, especially in a time like this.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see like one I'm very shocked that like one in like this almost like dystopian state of Japan right now. There's still like news outlets and stuff like that functioning. But yeah, I think it is going to be one of those things that they're like that it's becoming public enough to the right people to know that he can start to connect these dots. Obviously, most of your Joe Blow reporter's not really going to know like all these different parts that really Hawks was listing off towards the end of the episode, right? So I think, or not even just Hawks, even Endeavor as well. So I don't think it's really going to become public knowledge. I think it's going to be one of those big questions. But for the upper echelon of heroes and anybody kind of privy to that information, they are now starting to be given enough to like start connecting the dots and know, okay, something's up here. Something's up here with All Might. Something's up here with Deku. Like, let's try and get to the bottom of that.
Yeah. So I guess I don't even want to say too much because I think that's going to be the moment there. I mean, I agree. I don't think any public reporter is going to put it out, but I'm curious to see how some of the top heroes start kind of reacting to it because they're already all putting together Deku's probably something special, but exactly what that means, I don't think they understand the levity of it yet. So I'm just excited to see kind of how that goes. The only other thing I want to call out there is I loved the quick interaction between Bakugo and Best Genius at the end there. When they're walking towards Deku's room, Best Genius is like, "Oh, Great Lord, murdered Dynamite. How are you doing today?" He said, "How do I look like I'm doing?" As he's being pulled away.
Off? Yeah.
And that was one of my favorite moments for a while now. I think I love their interactions, and I think
they have such a funny relationship, man. It's so good.
They do. But with that, let's talk Plus Ultra to wrap up this episode. Plus Ultra is the award we give away each and every week where we decide one character that went beyond that went Plus Ultra. And James, I'm going to lead you off with who you think was this week's Plus Ultra recipient.
Yeah, so I think it's really the catalyst for the whole episode. I think that's and I don't think this episode would have ended the way it did without Ray. I think Ray basically like her deciding to go visit Endeavor after him having the shit kicked out of him by her son. I think that is like, it might be the definition of exposure therapy, and that is not easy. That is not easy for anyone. So I think her actually being able to face Endeavor and basically talk through this super traumatic event in their life is super, super admirable. And I mean, really with like the backing of like, I mean, Natsu's also somebody who's incredibly bitter as well, but I think Ray is really the big one in this episode.
Fuyumi is the sister's name. I just remembered it. Sorry, going on. With mine, that was what I was kind of initially thinking, but Ray actually said something during the episode that changed my mind of who the Plus Ultra it is, and really? I'm going with Shoto. Ray said that
he's
Shoto,
the family's hero.
Yeah, well, Shoto had a reason to hate both of his parents, to never really want either one of them, but he has been the connecting force of the entire family for a while now. He has worked to forgive his father as much and was willing to take on Dabi himself, assuming Endeavor couldn't fight, even though he had no reason to. I mean, it wasn't really his fight, it was his dad's fight. And he forgave his mom, despite not really having any great interactions with her. I mean, you talk about Ray being kind of the combining force here, and obviously her being there is what really brings the family fully together in this moment. But I don't think the family gets to this point if Shoto hadn't been slowly piecing it all back together leading up to that. So no, same kind of idea behind it, but I think Ray gave the credit of her being there to Shoto. So I think that kind of put Shoto a step above, especially with a young kid forgiving both of his parents at like 13. That's a pretty big fucking thing.
He's older than 13, isn't he? I thought they were like 15.
15, 16. I mean, whatever. They're still young.
Yeah. No. Okay. I actually might pivot my answer to that. No, I think that is I think that's a better justification for Plus Ultra for sure.
And I just don't think we've given him one in like 3 years.
We haven't given him one in ages. Yeah. I think it's been like
joint training.
Training. I was going to say class 1A versus 1B. I think that was the last time I had it happen.
But that'll be it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week to dive into episode 18 as we learn more about the Vestige State and All for One for All. But until then, have a great week and see y'all then.